All of us have our insecurities, our perceived flaws. Some come and go with age, but others last a lifetime. I remember learning the meaning of the word empathy in school and finally having a name for what I thought was my greatest weakness: the ability to understand the perspective and feelings of others, to walk in their shoes. I think I saw it as a flaw because of the intense emotions seeing the world from the shoes of others stirred inside me. Sadness, anger, occasionally rage. Over the years, I grew to see empathy as my Achilles heel, the trait that caused other people to see me as weak or not in control of my emotions. Every time my eyes would well with tears or I'd speak out in indignation, I'd feel a tinge of shame. Well, it's taken me a while, but I finally realized that empathy is not a flaw. In fact, it just might be a superpower. I can honestly say I didn't see empathy, at least within myself, as a positive thing until just within the last year. In fact, at the beginning of my career, I saw it as a curse. I started teaching in 2004 and instantly noticed things happening to the children of others that stirred that anger and rage I'd lived trying to suppress. Students being tracked by perception rather than ability, opportunities being handed to some and not even offered to others, students of color and English learners falling victim to the bigotry of low expectations. For far too many of our most vulnerable students, perception, policies, and politics are building walls, leaving some with clear disadvantages. As a new teacher, part of my assignment included 2 sections of English learner history, filled with students new to the country and language, but blended with students who'd been in U.S. schools 5 years or more, many since kindergarten. The only thing these students had in common was the label English learner. I did everything I could to meet their needs, but I instantly noticed there was no strategy that could overcome this situation that did not involve compromising rigor or support. We needed systemic change, so from that moment, I dedicated my career to English learner equity. A few years later, I pounced at the opportunity to join a committee designed to do exactly that: research and implement new programs to better meet English learner needs. Using data, traveling to visit model programs throughout the state, conducting internal research, even working with a prominent consultant, I was honored to be on a path to show these students and our community their true potential. In the end, it was decided students in U.S. schools 5 years or more needed the rigor, access, and support to be successful in a mainstream environment, while the newcomers, which were actually only 17% of English learners at the high school level at that time, needed something different. So the Language Institute was born, serving all newly arrived immigrant, refugee, and asylum-seeking teens in our city. By consolidating them to one campus, we were able to design specialized courses to meet their beginning linguistic and cultural needs. I was honored and excited to be the social science teacher in this program and absolutely could not wait to put our committee's hard work into action. Well, let's just say that first year didn't exactly go as planned. Our research had underestimated the diversity in our community's newcomer population. While we had anticipated having many Spanish speakers, we did not consider how many different countries they would come from other than Mexico. Honoring and respecting the differences in culture and even dialects became vital amongst our Spanish-speaking students. One thing most students from Mexico, Central America, and South America did have in common were the circumstances which pushed them from their native country, and for many, from the arms of their parents. They were not coming for the opportunity we had assumed, but were escaping danger. Like refugees evading war, these immigrant and asylum-seeking teens had seen and experienced atrocities unimaginable to most Americans. For them, the trauma of their past, and for many, the reality of their family separation, often needed to be addressed as urgently as their education. Our biggest surprise was that we had actual refugees, students who had survived war in the Middle East but had not been considered in our committee's research because their families had yet to resettle to our community. They arrived with equally urgent yet unique needs. Some had been withheld from school for safety reasons. Others awaited resettlement in a secondary country that did not offer access to education. So most arrived with significant gaps. Meeting the needs of these students was a challenge. They had so many obstacles to overcome. They were learning a language that used a different alphabet. They were processing what they had seen and experienced. And for many, waking up to the reality of how their new country and community perceived them, their language, their culture, their religion. You would think the one thing all of my students had in common would be sadness and frustration, but it wasn't. Whether it was a refugee from Iraq, an asylum seeker from El Salvador, an illiterate girl from Angola, or a disabled student from India, the one thing they all had in common was pure joy. While we grappled with trying to uncover and address their vast and evolving linguistic, cultural, emotional, and behavioral needs, they reminded me that empathy might not be such a bad thing after all. In fact, it had given us a shared purpose. Even though our histories were so different, we were now walking a path together. And along that path, I witnessed so much more than joy. It was their determination, their optimism, their appreciation for things we often take for granted, none of which I would have realized had I not taken the time to walk in their shoes. And then it hit me. It was confusing empathy with sympathy that would have been my fatal flaw. Empathy had led me to having tea in their homes, trying exotic cultural foods, attending weddings and funerals, even bringing my own family to dinner at the mosque for Ramadan, and to attend graduation parties in South Modesto. Sympathy, on the other hand, would have taken me down a path of low expectations, the exact same low expectations I had vowed to overcome. So after taking long walks in the shoes of our students, we worked hard to adjust teaching strategies, curriculum, and course offerings to better meet their needs. As they rose to the higher bar we were setting, we were able to quickly identify systemic and cultural barriers standing in the way of them achieving equity when compared to their native-born peers. For this journey, I walked in the shoes of their parents. Some no longer alive, many living abroad, most living locally, but with no knowledge of our language or our school system, all looking at us to open the door to their child's American dream. It was their shoes that took me through challenges so much more difficult than teaching a traumatized 17-year-old the Roman alphabet. Some think it's unrealistic. In fact, many have said maybe even a ploy for attention, but I just cannot shake the firm belief that the children of others deserve every opportunity as my own. I believe when educators come together and use empathy and equity as their secret ingredients, magic can happen. And for us, magic did happen, although very slowly. Policies guiding students on age and enrollment, based on rules that were established without the consideration of a 17-year-old girl enrolling with no formal education because she'd been denied at the hands of the Taliban, or an aspiring engineer from Cambodia who was enrolled as a sophomore due to his age and needed just a little extra time to get his literacy up so he could attend his dream school, UC Davis. These policies were unintentionally comparing them to their native-born peers and, as a result, oppressing them. Telling students who'd often worked twice as hard, they had half the options, was just not a compromise we were willing to make. And policy was only one of the barriers I mentioned. Words written to govern a community, to regulate a school system, to even create a positive classroom environment can be changed to adjust to the people it serves. Change comes easier in some institutions than others, but for all, it requires awareness, empathy, and political will. In other words, culture. For years, my colleagues and I have been trying to address the barriers standing in the way of our students, to no avail. We've been consistently reminded that the empathy and equity we've poured into our program doesn't seem to exist outside our classroom walls. So while we have patiently waited for culture and policy to catch up to the endless opportunity our program has to offer, we started to use the void of actual newcomer policy to the advantage of some of our students. For example, I remember the first day of one Iraqi refugee girl's school experience as if it were yesterday. She arrived not knowing a word in English and even struggled when directions were translated into her native Arabic. She was visibly overwhelmed, but she had this warrior-like spirit that radiated throughout the classroom. We had data that showed she arrived with a preschool literacy rate, and by the time she was finished with the first school year, only 10 months of formal education, she was reading around 3rd grade. The following year, she dove into leadership, started playing tennis, and set high goals for herself. So to support her aspirations, we established a graduation plan that was within the rules and common for newcomers around the state and the nation. We offered her a 5th year of high school, which for her was really only a 4th because she'd missed all of 9th grade, so that she could not only graduate, but graduate fully literate and university eligible. And she did just that. That overwhelmed refugee that entered my classroom, not knowing the Roman alphabet, with gaps in her education, but with the will to overcome it all through education, had done it. This year, she started her 2nd year in college at a school I might have had some influence on, my alma mater, Chico State. She was one of many students who graduated past the traditional age of 18, but with the academic and cultural competence to dive directly into a 4-year university. In fact, since 2014, 90% of Language Institute graduates have gone on to higher education. They've enrolled at our local community college, CSUs, and UCs across the state. This spring, we celebrated our first private school acceptance. A Syrian refugee who didn't arrive until October of her junior year, who used the 5th year to get the literacy and course requirements she needed to be accepted at the University of Pacific. With a $40,000 scholarship. The United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees was so impressed with her story, they made her life into an international online advertisement promoting the value of refugee resettlement. I was equally proud of a Language Institute alumni from Mexico who recently graduated with his master's in education and 2 teaching credentials in Spanish and math from Stanford. He's currently teaching in Los Angeles, providing immigrant students just like him the access and opportunity they need to also defy their demographics. So back to my internal struggle with empathy being a superpower or a curse. Please don't get me wrong. Ultimately, the amazing students of the Language Institute did the hard work to achieve such greatness. But my colleagues and I had to fight with the will of entitled, empowered parents, unimaginable battles to open the doors of equity, which made the stories I just told you even possible. And even with such astonishing accomplishments, antiquated policies were allowing some students to slip through the cracks. And because we fight for our students as if they were our own children, and we will not accept anything but equity, we have made both allies and enemies along the way. In this decade-long culture war we've waged, we've heard some revealing comments about our community. These words don't represent the opinion of one or a few, but of a culture that I hope together we can change. Words like, "It's a shame your students are taking resources away from real Americans," or, "Can you please stop celebrating the success of your students? Other immigrants might want to move to our community, putting an unfair burden on our city." Or, "Many students graduate reading and writing below grade level. Why should your students deserve the advantage of extra time?" Or, "It's time your families stop complaining and start being grateful for what they have." I have to admit that last one hit me like a punch in the gut because I am their family. And if their families have been complaining, it's only because my colleagues and I have educated and empowered them to stand up for what is rightfully theirs. In fact, very rarely were they complaining directly. They were given a voice by a group of amazing community advocates, many of whom are with us tonight, that also happen to be gifted with the trait I have grown to embrace as a superpower. Well, I'm sad to say the culture I just quoted is currently winning. Effective this school year, policies are being interpreted in a way that deny our students the opportunity to access an extra year of high school, whether it be for literacy, college readiness, or university eligibility, among other mandates that have rewritten our philosophy of equal opportunity, empowerment, and access, literally taking us back to where we were before the program began in 2009. What sure feels like hate, I think, is probably fear. Fear of exactly what, I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty confident it's based on the stereotypes that my students break on a daily basis. I know what my fear is. My fear is that a community or a country without empathy remains divided. Walk 1 mile in my students' shoes, and you will see that giving them what they need to be successful doesn't take away from our own. It defines who we are. When our community, or any community, comes together to use empathy to create equity for the children of others, we can defy demographics and improve quality of life for everyone. Thank you.